The Cambridge Companion to Wyndham Lewis brings together a variety of modernist scholars to talk about the multifaceted work of Wyndham Lewis, the literary works, the visual artworks, and the very extensive body of cultural criticism and political writing. It's essentially a kind of 360 of a very multifaceted, very complex artist and writer. He's relevant today, one, because many of the topics that most concerned him are topics that we're still talking about. So the role of the media, the changes in gender role, the role of youth, the place of the arts in society. So things that are very much a part of our topical conversation. Also, he was a satirist. And there's plenty of things to satirize today. I'd like to think about what Wyndham Lewis would think about our current presidential debates and our current presidential campaign. I'm sure he would have had a number of interesting things to say about that situation. Well, one aspect of Lewis's London was that it's a huge city, and it's a huge industrial city that had a 19th century inheritance. Lewis really wanted to be a man of the 20th century and to take London into the 20th century, really break away that incrustation of conventions and inheritances of the 19th century. So he really attempted to, in various ways, both innovate in the arts and also provoke what he conceived of as those forces of conservatism and of convention that he was opposed to. London was a space where it was a global metropolis. It was the center of an important empire, and it was a city that was at the center of the forces that would eventually lead to World War I, which would in fact draw Wyndham Lewis into its firestorm as a combatant, as an artillery officer, and eventually as a war artist as well. Vorticism was in many ways Lewis's attempt, almost a kind of one-man attempt to create an avant-garde of the sort that we saw in Europe in movements like Expressionism, Futurism, Dadaism, and in particular it was a response to Futurism. In many ways it's indebted to Futurism, but there are some very important differences as well. Futurism really took the objects of the city and the objects of the world and tried to dissolve them into forces and speeds and vectors of movement. Lewis really was interested in the way that objects appeared, but as vessels of energy and as vessels of tension. And the idea of the vortex was something that was formed energy, and Lewis was always interested in that idea form, not dissolving form, but really exploring the tensions and the energies that went into artistic forms. I think the big surprise for me was Lewis is very often thought of, I mean, he was a personality who was very combative, very conflictual. He fought with pretty much all of his friends as well as his enemies. And one of the surprising things that I found in a number of the contributions was a different side of Lewis, which was, it's hard to describe him as tender, but there's a kind of vulnerable side, there's a lyrical side, there's a genuinely, at least spiritually searching side that has to be seen as a complement to that Wyndham Lewis, combative, polemical. He cast himself in the persona of the enemy. And there's a complement to that persona of the enemy, which is really this much more sensitive and spiritual artist.